So what we're all about philosophy being like the driving force behind our work. And the big kind of motivating question is really like, what's the philosophy that drives you? What, at the end of the day, do you say, this is what I believe in and why I do what I do?
I believe in permissionless innovation and in transparency,
Hmm.
kind of above all else. It took many years for me to actually discover that there's this person, Richard Stallman, who, you know, came about and actually invented these concepts and sort of like concretized them and made them more definitionally understandable for people. And from those contributions, like everything else, kind of built around Richard's ideas, and people actually had a sort of framework for describing this phenomenon of like being able to like contribute to sort of transparent and permissionless
Did
things, creations, ideas. Yeah.
did you know though that you were going to your role in it? I mean, it is not your only role, but your role right now was going to be really heavily focused on the commercialized part.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know if I had any kind of like intentional career path or like decision to kind of do what I'm doing. It just sort of like evolved that way. And I've I've shared this publicly a lot over the last recent years, but I was entirely homeschooled, and so I was given a lot of like freedom to be very curious. And for me, when I was growing up, it was always like I'm curious about how everything works,
Mm.
and I didn't have a sort of like um, constrained way of thinking because I didn't take sort of conventional academic curriculum.
Do you see the laser focus, almost pathological laser focus that people have accused me of, and I've seen a lot of the greatest founders have as a necessity to
Yeah, of
be
course.
radically great?
Yeah, of course. You need to have focus. You need to have something that you're wanting to get really excellent and great at, which in any endeavor, unless you're born, you know, which I feel to think of almost any humans that are born this way, but like with some set of innate, you know, incredibly impeccable skills from birth, which almost no one has. I mean, I guess some people have like really great memories, like photographic or like eidetic memories, where you can kind of like recall things really accurately over long time frames. Some people remember when they were born and how they were born and what it felt like to be in the womb and how the pressure of coming out and like the whole thing. There's actually people who have memories that are that good, but I don't think that that's necessarily like related to skill because you can have. I know a handful of people who have perfect memories, but they don't have as many super tangible, useful skills. And so I think the development of skills probably necessitates obsessive, sort of like almost autistic focus and just like maniacally, like really, like I am so like in like Jensen Huang is a good example of this. Like he's just like obsessed with parallel processing and parallel computation. Like listen to all of his recent interviews. He's been doing so many recent interviews. I've been watching all of them and like learning a lot from the guy. He's like clearly maniacally obsessed. There's one quote that jumps out to me recently. I think he said this when he was doing a conversation with Patrick Collison from Stripe, and he was like, "When I watch movies, I don't remember the movies because I'm thinking about GPUs while I'm watching." And I'm like, "Wow," because Patrick was trying to get out the human aspect of like how do you work life balance and all this. And he's like, "Yeah, I watch movies, but I don't remember anything because the whole time I'm just thinking of NVIDIA and GPUs." Yeah.
But how do you balance like the obsession with the mission of like promoting open source, building it as large as possible, with like the realities of doing right for your funders? And like what do you preach to the folks that you invest in when you say like, I'm your investor, but like you should only take me this seriously?
Yeah, I have some different views on capitalism and creating businesses that I
Let's hear it.
sort of,
I'm curious about that.
yeah, I mean, I think that the best businesses that produce a lot of profits and are very sustainable and like have this like massive cash cow sort of like effect are a form of philanthropy, right? So like I think capitalism in its fullest, most kind of ideal expression is not to say like idealism is the goal, right? But like I think fundamentally like capitalism should actually produce the most sustainable and beneficial contributions for humanity in the form that capitalism is sort of like constructed as, which is kind of like in my world like free markets, permissionless innovation, and allowing anyone to sort of have access to markets. And then obviously there's all kinds of things that happen when you have oligopolies and monopolies and that sort of thing. But pretty much all technology innovation is enabled by and driven by open source. So Richard Stallman in 1983 gets sufficiently pissed off, right? Human emotions drive most of our behavior. And he's upset by the copyright framework in the United States getting applied to source code, computer source code specifically. And what that means is, the copyright system goes back, a century. It's like a pretty foundational part of basically the foundational idea behind intellectual property, IP. And this application really got started at IBM, and I sort of learned all this history over the years from being extremely privileged to know a lot of the people who either interacted with or worked with
But when did for you, because you have, I hear two philosophies. I hear a philosophy on capitalism and a philosophy on open source. And the most beautiful thing that I think OSS does in like an amazing way is I don't think I think it's starting to merge those two philosophies. And I guess my question for you, because you've been at this for a little bit, and I don't remember how much you deployed, but over 100 million, let's just say that. Have you seen the results of your work paying off yet? Are you starting to see the
no, I've definitely seen it. I think there are unfortunate failures in understanding and sort of deep appreciation of these approaches by sort of later stages of capitalism, or as businesses get very, very large and much more successful, where you have this almost resistance to the fundamentals. And I find that to be very frustrating. So for example, like license changes, when you look at what HashiCorp or MongoDB or Elastic have done, they changed the license model of the core technology, which is very permissive, open source, and sort of supportive and embracing of decentralized innovation, essentially. And so for businesses in general, the one thing that causes them to be able to have an output of innovation is their ability to continue to innovate. There was a framework that was written by a really great economist called The Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen. And large businesses tend to just have this issue where you get really complacent and fat and happy, essentially, and sort of the rate of innovation goes down. Ironically, this also happens a lot with open source companies. By the way, it can also happen with open source projects.
Would you, I guess, so this is a kind of a personal question for me, because I've tried to rebel against that type of innovator's dilemma, trap that people fall into. But as an investor, and I think I know your answer, but I want to validate it. As an investor, if a founder came to you, they're on the meal ticket to IPO, and they say to you, I don't think we're innovating fast enough. We're going to have to do some fundamentally weird things. Your answer would be?
I'm always pro max innovation above anything else. It is possible to be too innovative. It is possible to not effectively meet the world where it is in terms of the sort of the palatability and the structural elements of how society could actually adopt a product or adopt a technology, right? And so if we're going and saying, let's introduce the iPhone form factor before we have, effective bandwidth pipes on this thing called the internet, there's this misalignment of, technology platform kind of cohesion that allows for that to happen. There are many other examples of this. So it is possible to be too innovative with a particular product that is it sort of outstrips where the world is in terms of the infrastructure to make that realistic. But I'm always pro, thinking about how you can innovate more, because in my view, there are no moats. There are no, how do you get, what's your defensibility posture and thing and all this kind of stuff. None of that matters. All that's BS in my opinion. The only moat in business is, which is again, sort of a simple differential equation, your continuous sustained rate of innovation over time. So there's several variables in there, but over time is how many periods and epochs does that continually tend to look like it's true? Your rate is the speed at which the thing is happening, and then innovation means something quite specific. It means how many things you're creating and adding and improving in the given technology that you happen to be delivering to the world. And I think it's just a simple fact that if you look at the largest, most successful businesses in history, They all have demonstrated checkboxes on all of those things. They have delivered an innovative product that has met the world where it is. They have continued to innovate on it consistently and continuously over the rate of time that they have existed. And it has that there has been an either like not noticeable or indistinguishable from like non-existent decay rate, meaning the slowing of the innovation rate over the entire period that they've existed. So it's just been like sustained. It's like a sustained rate of innovation.
Yes. Yeah.
Elon, for example, Elon talks a lot about this with SpaceX and Tesla and many of his companies. This is a physics framework. It's not, it's also not original to Elon. It's not, it's just, these are fundamental things. And so like when you have, it's almost like gravity or, just like a lot of the fundamental basic tenets of physics, like as a business, if you don't kind of exploit those principles, you will end up in a place where you're going to get out innovated or out competed or disrupted or transformed, whatever metaphor you want to use, by some competitive thing eventually.
Yeah, and everything you say just feels like I'm taking my brain and putting it into somebody else and they're speaking. It's very strange. But I wanted to open it up to the rest of the folks here. And first, my wife, Grace, has a question.
Hi, Joseph. Thanks for being here. I wanted to pick up on some stuff that you said earlier that just like has stuck with me. You were talking about the idea of money, right? How money works, and then you were talking about how communication and miscommunication are the source of that's everything, right? Yeah. That's sort of how everything works. I'm curious about those two ideas together, and I'm putting it in the context of like folks. A lot of us here are starting sort of new businesses, so that's the practical side of it. But also, I'm interested in the philosophical side of how those two things meet.
Money is a form of communication, and it is as error prone and as faulty as natural language. When you make a promise as a human, the durability and consistency of that promise is a function of your ability to actually follow through and keep the promise. When a government prints money and also is factually the arbiter of the supply of the money, you have to trust that the decisioning engine, the decision-making kind of like collection of people, whether it's the FOMC or however else the federal organization in whatever country operates the supply and distribution of money operates, you have to trust that they're actually going to be doing these things. And so trust so the idea of trust is actually a language concept. It comes from like linguistics and sort of like how we actually transmit data and information to each other. And there's actually a physicist by the name of Mark Burgess that I worked with in the past who concretized this idea. It's called promise theory. And it's actually more of like a physics kind of theory, almost like game theory, von Neumann's game theory, or sort of like different, set theory, or different sort of math or physics frameworks. But these are really fundamental ideas, and I think if you peel it back enough, you very quickly get to crypto. You very quickly get to like, okay, how do we just like eliminate or solve for all of these really lossy, error-prone, hard to actually concretize and implement in trustless and mechanistically reliable ways, information transmission, kind of like processes for humans. And so, we have this thing called a blockchain. It's a type of database. It gives you cryptographic verifiability of the transactions and all this kind of stuff. And I think directionally, I'm kind of like a crypto blockchain like noob. OSS Capital's made like 4 whatever Web3 crypto, whatever brand you want to put around it, crypto investments out of some 65, 70 investments we've done. So, we're by no means like, all in crypto or anything, but I think directionally that's probably the answer for money. And very interestingly, it intersects exactly with open source because blockchains are permissionless, they're open source, they're cryptographically transparent, and they give this sort of like mathematical guarantee to, there is no tampering or manipulation of the supply. You don't have to trust someone's word, that they're gonna print more money or they're gonna reduce the supply arbitrarily. You have math. You can trust math, and there's a lot of implementation details around that. Obviously, probably the biggest one is you have this gradual decentralization. You create Bitcoin, it's not immediately decentralized. It was actually extremely centralized in the very beginning. A lot of people have a hard time understanding this. By the way, this is also true with open source projects. There's a sort of like architectural decentralization that you get from blockchains. But in open source, you also have decentralization. It's just not architectural. It's more kind of I don't know, I guess what the word would be it's a different property of decentralization. It's kind of like I guess maybe the decentralization comes from the way you can access and run the technology permissionlessly, but the technology itself is not decentralized because you can have like a isolated MySQL database, on like my computer here, and then like a more centralized one over there, but it's the same code base. This is very interesting. It's like the code can be decentralized, but the implementation of that code is not necessarily decentralized, but you get the similar kind of properties of decentralization. And so these ideas are all very complicated, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think the intersection of promise theory, money, and open source, there's a lot of really cool things there.
There was a
Oh, thanks. Yeah, super interesting.
oops, sorry to cut off my wife, but I've been really into this idea of experience utility and remember utility, which is like it's a psychological but also economic kind of viewpoint of what is the story you tell, and is value created in the story you tell or in the experience that you're having, and oftentimes it's created in the story that you're telling, and very seldomly in the actual experience that you're having. And so there's been a lot of economic studies around that, and it's like yeah, a lot of that we could go into stories, but let me jump into Kaj here. Kaj has a question. Here he comes.
Hey Joseph, nice to meet you. So basically, I have a product that transcribes EMT conversations, and I wanted to open source it. And basically, it will allow companies, EMS companies, to have a direct, transparent, I guess, lens into what EMTs are doing on the field.
Mhm.
And I'm a little torn because part A is we can accept some non-dilutive funding from the NIH, but a lot of people are pushing me to get like dilutive funding so that we can go out and make some money on this. And I'm kind of like what you're saying, like I'm kind of wanted to hear your thoughts about that about the centralization and the diffusion of that centralization that's going on, and that's what we want to do.
Any of these decisions always boil down to what your desired outcome is and your intention. That's the way I look at things. I tend to be this might really annoy a lot of people, but I tend to be a lot more amoral about how you think about these things. I am an open source maximalist in terms of like, I wish and I hope everything was open source. And I talk a lot about that. And that's kind of like what drives me at the end of the day. But I think if your desired outcomes map better to, you would have a higher probability of being successful with, and again, if this is one of your desired outcomes, to raise some amount of capital to make progress, take any one of the decisions that increases the probability of that, as opposed to thinking ideologically about it and going and just saying we need to be open source for the sake of open source, if that makes sense. And I know that's kind of like a frustrating answer. The reason I put that framework out there is I have nothing against proprietary software. I have nothing against closed source. In fact, I think that's totally fine and that's awesome and that's a decision people make and totally valid. And I'm a happy iPhone user. A lot of examples of this in my life, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm actually not ideological about what I do. I would say I'm more philosophical than I am ideological, but I think that there's like a grounded framework in like how we can actually produce businesses. Otherwise, people wouldn't trust me with their money. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I can probably keep rambling on.
Yeah, so I have one last kind of like big question, which is, are you satisfied with the work you're doing? Like, are you, because
it's a huge privilege. I'm extremely
okay.
happy. I wake up every day and I think like, how the hell do I have this job? For many years, I was actually doing it kind of just, as a hobby curiosity and just personal interest.
Yeah.
And I realized, wow, there's this crazy thing called venture capital. And there's like this whole space of companies that exist that, some small handful of them could actually end up being big businesses. Like that's how venture capital works. Like, 2 or 3 out of 10 things end up working. And so I think my learning from it has been, and I try to encourage people to discover this for themselves. And I feel like I've won the lottery many times over because I've been in this situation now for many years, but like find and optimize your life as much as possible, as early as possible. Most people never find this in their entire lifetimes, but find the concentric circles of skill. Can it make money? And are you really deeply, 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 deeply obsessed with it? Like so passionate about it, you would do it for free for the rest of your life. For me, I checked all those boxes and it's like, skill, I'm pretty good at it. Can it make money? And, can it potentially make a lot of money? That's also a yes. And then the third thing is like, I'm deeply obsessed with it. These things are all sort of super orthogonal to each other. Many people are really, really good at things that they're not obsessed with. Many people are obsessed with things that they're actually not really that good at, and vice versa in terms of making money. So yeah, I feel like I won the lottery, basically.
I want to leave it at that. Sorry, Kaj, because I want to like very much have a happy high note, and I can go into postmodernist questions about value and proximity to story and things like that. But maybe we can do that another time, maybe in New Orleans or San Francisco.
That's good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, you're great.